United States Army presents The Big Picture, an official report produced for the armed forces and the American people.
To most Americans, the very symbol of government is the Capitol building in Washington, where the machinery of democracy works its wonders. Almost in its shadow is another building which symbolizes just as strongly one of the indispensable freedoms in our democracy, the National Press Building. It is no accident of history that the American people are the best informed in the world. From the very beginning of the American experiment, it has been recognized that only with a free and unshackled press can democracy survive. This recognition of the press's importance has given it a position of undeniable privilege and prestige in our society. But it has also placed upon it the grave obligation to keep the people truly informed. Nowhere is this obligation more certainly recognized. Nowhere is the responsibility more keenly felt than in the National Press Building. Its distinguished tenants have behind them a breadth of knowledge of our national life exceeded by no other group, a knowledge of the intricacies of the American scene in all its locations. For these men comprise the Washington bureaus of leading newspapers and news services throughout the country. And for their readers in all parts of the nation, they record day-by-day history as it is made at the seat of government. The tradition of a responsible and professional press is heavy in this building, where the proudest trophies are the press plates of memorable front pages. The men of the Washington Press Corps are among the finest their profession can produce. Most of them in their careers have chronicled the political contests, the social upheavals, and the wars which have formed the story of our time. One of the most respected members of the Washington Press Club is its president, Mr. William Lawrence of the New York Times Washington Bureau. He is here shown introducing General Maxwell D. Taylor to the National Press Club on the occasion of General Taylor's retirement as Chief of Staff of the United States Army. Later, with Mr. Lawrence, we will screen the actual combat films of the middle phase of the Korean War. Bill Lawrence's daily job of reporting brings him into constant contact with the men and events who make headlines. He is exceptionally qualified in the field of newspaper reporting. In his 18 years with the New York Times, Bill Lawrence has covered some very significant stories. During World War II, he was for a while chief of the Times Bureau in Moscow, and then he reported on the war from Okinawa. He flew with B-29s over Tokyo and other Japanese cities. And after World War II, he covered the Civil War in Greece. And then, with many other illustrious reporters, he saw and reported the war in Korea. Today, we're fortunate to have Bill Lawrence with us to look into a particular phase of that war. Good to see you, Bill.
Nice to see you, Stu.
You know, I was very fortunate recently on a big picture to have one of your colleagues, Jim Lucas of Scripps Howard.
Yeah, I got a chance to see that one, Stu, and as I remember it, Jim picked up the war about the beginning in June and carried it up to the defense of the Pusan perimeter.
That's right. And today I'd like to pick it up from that same point, carry it on, from that period when we broke out of the perimeter in September 1950. Seems like a long time ago, doesn't it?
Well, in some ways it does. I've covered a couple of wars since then and filed a lot of stories from a lot of different places. And yet, no one who was there, soldier or reporter, is likely to forget it, especially that period you were just mentioning, September, October 1950.
That was a period of pretty high morale, wasn't it?
Oh, very high. You see, first there'd been the retreat, then that holding operation along the Nakhtong, and then finally we were able to go on an offensive
That was smashing the North Korean army.
That's right.
Bill, you're the kind of a reporter that calls the shots as he sees them. Your record speaks for itself. A very accurate one. I have a book of clippings of stories that you filed during the Korean War. And I'd like to read a sentence from one of them.
Shoot.
You wrote it in late August 1950. There is a sense of optimism in American circles that certainly could not have been detected 2 weeks ago. What prompted you to write that?
Well, let's recap a little bit. Swiftly, treacherously, without warning, the North Korean army had smashed across the 38th parallel in late June. They fully expected they'd be able to drive all the way down the peninsula before anybody could or would come to the aid of the South Koreans. But fortunately, the United Nations were able to act swiftly. They branded this an act of aggression, and this authorized other nations to come to the aid of the South Korean army. Now, the first available troops were those U.S. occupation forces stationed in Japan. Just 3 divisions.
Badly equipped and under strength.
And the North Koreans were strong and well-equipped. They'd prepared for this invasion for a long time. And consequently, our forces had a pretty rough time of it in those summer months of 1950.
About the only thing we could do was withdraw to a defensive line south of the Nakhtong River.
Well, withdraw is a polite way of saying we got chased there, and we did hope we could hold there while we built up supplies and equipment and men. We did manage to do that, although it seemed like a pretty thin hope, very, very much at the time.
Mm-hmm. But it did break up the enemy's plan for a quick push all the way down the peninsula.
Well, they just couldn't get through, as I said. Every time he tried, the enemy weakened himself a bit more, and at the same time, from America and from other nations, troops were pouring into Pusan, more and more equipment, and we were rebuilding the South Korean army, which had taken such a terrible beating in those early days of the war. And so, with the knowledge that we were going to make this play at Incheon, it was possible late in August to report truthfully that a new sense of confidence was taking hold.
Looked as if things were really going to happen.
It did indeed, and things did happen. More swiftly and on a grander scale than anybody could have dreamed the day I wrote that story.
On September 15th, 1950, the UN forces take the offensive. An assault fleet appears off Walney Island at Incheon Harbor, 150 miles behind enemy lines. It's a daring end-run maneuver which takes the sleeping enemy completely by surprise. At 0630 hours, the Marines begin the assault. The naval barrage has cleared the way for them, but this is still a risky operation. Headquarters must gamble on the first try being good. Incheon's violent 30-foot tides leave no time for a second attempt.
We had orders to neutralize resistance and do it fast. Dig them out and cover up the holes. It took us 58 minutes to secure the island.
With the next tide, more Marines move into the streets of Incheon itself. They meet little resistance, and within hours, the city is secure. The big gamble has paid off. With the surrender of Incheon's modern harbor, the back door to Seoul is opened wide. Simultaneously, in the south, the reinforced 8th Army breaks out of its Pusan stronghold, splitting the encircling Red forces as it thrusts across the Nakhtong River to begin its drive northward. At Incheon, the 7th Infantry Division swarms ashore to strengthen the UN foothold in the north. Thousands of enemy troops are being trapped in the southwest as the Pusan spearhead races north to join up with Incheon forces.
On the way to Seoul, we took a good many prisoners, too. But they didn't come easy.
nation's strength is growing in the north. Men and machines, first hundreds, then thousands, flow inland from the sea to join the attack toward Seoul. With each step, however, they meet stiffening resistance as the retreating enemy consolidates his forces. At Busan, still another nation joins the growing UN command as 1,200 men of a crack Philippine regimental combat team come ashore. And at Kimpo Air Base, south of Seoul, men of the 187th Airborne Regiment arrive from Japan to become the first paratroop unit to enter the conflict. This newly recaptured airfield has also become an advanced base for increased air attacks on the enemy's supply and escape routes. As the spearhead from Busan gathers momentum, columns of transport barrel northward against a disheartened enemy. In many towns, the entire populace turns out to shout its welcome.
It was like France all over again. Couldn't understand what these people were saying either. Some places, nobody was around to say anything. It's only about 20 miles from Incheon to Seoul, paved highway all the way. But it took us a week of hard fighting to make the trip. Finally, though, our amphibious gear, crammed full of rock and American Marines, started massing up at the Han River across from Seoul. It was time to retake the city. The softening up process got underway.
The Han River crossing means a full-scale amphibious operation, since the Han, here near its mouth, is well over a mile across.
The Reds who had thrown back an earlier night attack were gone, pulled out to dig in among the streets of Seoul itself. The battle for Seoul was rough. 10,000 communist troops garrisoned every building and street junction with orders to fight to the death. A great many did.
The shattered city is retaken September 26th. During the battle for Seoul, the trap is closing swiftly about Red forces in the southwest. The day after Seoul falls, troops from the 7th and 1st Cavalry Divisions join up just south of Suwon. 2 days later, in the battered Capitol building, special ceremonies are held as General MacArthur officially returns the city to Syngman Rhee, President of the Republic of Korea. Now begins a tragic homecoming for the thousands who had fled the city only 3 months before.
You'd look at these people, scratching through the ashes of what used to be their homes, wonder where they got the guts to go on. Still, I guess we'd do the same back home if it came to that.
As life begins to take root again in Seoul, the UN advance in the eastern sector goes on. On September 30th, ROK forces reach the 38th parallel. They cross it the following day.
One old guy couldn't keep it straight who was who. Turned out to meet the ROK Army with North Korean flags.
The end of September finds the war back where it started, but the cost has been great. On October 6th, at a UN cemetery between Seoul and Incheon, Major General O.P. Smith, 1st Marine Division Commander, honors Marine dead. Representing the Army is Major General David Barr, 7th Division Commander. Korean troops are honored by Colonel Park In-yip, commanding the ROK 17th Regiment. The silent thanks and admiration of each commander for what his men have given is echoed by the people who owe their freedom to that willing sacrifice. Elsewhere, the conflict goes on without let-up. B-29 squadrons based in Japan and on Okinawa continue their daily blasting of red industrial and transport centers in the north.
For us, it was a funny situation. A commuter's war, somebody called it. You'd eat breakfast with your wife and kids, spend the day over some rail center or factory or harbor, and head back home to sleep in your own bed at night.